this be based on the Tanya concept?
Okay, welcome to everybody who is both present here in Shul and joining us over our Facebook Live stream for our Torah and Hot Issues. Tonight we have a special request from Morris Abramov. Welcome. And the special request is something off the back of a terrible tragedy. The tragedy of those who lost their lives on Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer, one of the happiest days of the year, has become a tragic day of remembrance for so many families. And the question is, what is this business of visiting the graves of tzaddikim? Where does it come from? Is it something that's universal? What are we aiming to achieve? And that's for tonight's discussion. So the reason that it is relevant right now is that we have had, just in last week's parasha, we had the story of Caleb, one of the spies who comes to the land of Canaan, and one of his first stops is to daven at the cave of the patriarchs. So we look in the first source here, and the pasuk says, "Vayalu ba'Negev," they came up through the Negev, "Vayavoy ad Chevron," and they came to Chevron. No, what's Vayavo? And he came to Chevron. I notice we have a problem there with the tense. Vayalu, Vayavo. And do you have a sheet there? The sheets are just over there, Morris. So they went up and he came. So how do we switch? Why is it that we switch from the plural to the singular? Continues the pasuk, Vayavo, and they came. Vayavo Mubayle. So it should have said, and they came. Amar Rava Malamed, Rava says it teaches us should perish Kalev Moutsas Meraglim, that Kalev separated himself from the council of the other spies. V'halach, he went He went to daven at the grave of our patriarchs. He went to Chevron. He went to daven at the Maras Machpelah. Amalhan, he said to them, Avoisai, my forefathers, Bakshu alai rachamim she'inatzel ma'atzas meraglim. Request mercy for me that I should be saved from the counsel of the other spies. Why would he have thought that maybe they would err? Well, he already had a hint from Yeshua. Moshe has already blessed Hoshea bin Nun and renamed him Yehoshua. And we're already told there, the Yud Hey is God, Yah Hoshea. God should save you from the bad counsel of the other spies. Kalev hears this and he's like, well, wait a second, what about me? I also want to be saved from any bad advice. And so he goes to the patriarchs and says, beseech mercy for me. This is what we call in modern parlance, be a gutter better, or melitz yosher. Be a good advocate for me in the heavenly court. That sometimes we talk about merit. Here, that I should be directed to the right path. Okay, so there's our story from last week's parasha. Now let's problematize it a little. The problem begins in the book of Devarim 18:11, that says, so for those just tuning in, that first piece was from the Gemara in Sota, page 34b. So the pasuk in Devarim, in Parashat Shoftim, that talks about all sorts of magic and superstition that the Canaanites were engaged with, and that when we come into the Promised Land, we should not occupy ourselves with. Goes through all of those different types, and one of the verses says, V'chover chover, one who casts spells, V'shoel ov, one who consults ghosts, V'yedoni, or spirits, V'dorish el hamesim, and necromancy, inquiring of the dead. You're not allowed to speak to the dead. So if we see this, no Dorish al Mesim, Dorish means to expound or to ask. Well, what are we doing when we're going to the graves of tzaddikim? It could are we not transgressing this pasuk that says "V'derish al mesim"? We don't talk to the dead. Okay, so there's the problem. Now let's see some of the sources that speak to it one way or the other. Says the Gemara in Titus. The Gemara is talking about when troubles befall our people, specifically drought. So the community would establish a fast, and part of the rituals of the fast would be they would go to the cemetery to pray. So the Gemara asks, it's Gemara in Titus 16a, Lama yotzin lebeis hakvaros. Why do we go to the cemetery? Right, we have this tradition, we go to the cemetery. Why? Where does it come from? Tliki bar Rabbi Levi bar Chama Rabbi Chanina. So it's machlokes, there's a debate as to the source of the minhag. Chad Amar one says, Hare anu chashuvin lefanecha kamesim. We're standing in the cemetery saying, God, we're as good as dead. Right? So please answer us. Right? We're going to die of drought here. So we're going to be just like all of these dead, and so please have mercy on us. It's kind of an environment that we're creating as we turn to God, either probably not from God's perspective, because God sees everything, and He understands everything, and He knows everything, but from our perspective, we want to maybe conjure up, awaken, arouse within ourselves the feeling of teshuvah. That's what a fast is meant to achieve. And when we're in a specific context, that in that environment, that helps us to teshuvah. The other opinion is kadeshi vaksho aleinu mesim rachamim. All right. So similar to what we saw with Kalev. What we're doing by going to the cemetery is we are asking the dead, deceased forebears, that they should ask for mercy on our behalf from God. That they should stand before the Beis Din Shalmaila, the heavenly court, and they should intercede on our behalf. Might be now, what's the difference? I didn't translate this. What's the difference between these two opinions? Kivri, Nachrim, bless you. If it would be a non-Jewish cemetery. So according to the first opinion, Jewish, not Jewish, doesn't make a difference. Whatever cemetery, you're going to feel that environment. And in terms of the asking our forebears to intercede on our behalf, then presumably we're talking about a Jewish cemetery. Okay. Continues the Gemara in Baba Kama. Another example of, and we're going to problematize this a little more, because I know Morris, you're itching that it should be more problematic. I'm only giving one side of the story. We'll get to the other side of the story soon. So far, I brought the pasuk. We'll see that there are other sources to make it that we need to deal with. But one more source that says that seems to say that we do engage in religious activity at a graveside is the Gemara in Bava Kama 16b. That says that covered asaloi b'moiso. When King Hezekiah died, they gave him great honor. In contrast with his father, who was wicked and had introduced idolatry into the land, King Hezekiah was someone who promoted Torah and Yiddishkeit throughout the land, and so they gave him a lot of kavod when he died. Malamed, what's the ultimate form of kavod? Malamed teaches us Shehoshivu Yeshiva al Kivroi. They actually set up a yeshiva at his graveside. Right? So sometimes you've got all sorts of, I don't know if one exists in Meran, maybe there's a yeshiva, I'm not sure. There is a yeshiva at the Ohel of the Lubavitcher Rebbe in Queens, New York. There's a yeshiva there. Somehow it grew into beyond just a place to visit. But there's a source for it. Right? You have King Hezekiah here, who there was a yeshiva at his graveside. Sure, let's see what the Tosfos says. Shiva Yeshiva al Kivroi, they set up a yeshiva by his grave. Lefi shehir ba Torah b'Yisrael, because he increased Torah learning in Israel. Kedamrin b'chelik, as we say in the Gemara Sanhedrin. Shabbatku midan v'ad Beersheba, because they searched throughout the land. V'lo matzu ish v'isha tinok v'tinokas, they couldn't find a single man, woman, child, boy or girl, who were not expert in the laws of purity and impurity. And when we use that as an expression to be able to say, well, obviously, they knew all of the Chumash, and they knew all of the Tanakh. They knew everything, all the way down to the finest details of the laws of purity and impurity. Right? An Ava Tuma, and an Ava Vosa Tuma, and a Rishon Latuma, and a Sheni Latuma, all of these various levels. For those who want to find out more, we have our daily Mishnah, plug for noon every day. At the moment, we are in the tractate of Taharas. But back in the day, in the time of King Chizkiyahu, everybody knew, even the smallest children knew all of these laws inside out. Such was his program of renewal. It was a renewal program. And since he did this, V'lo al kivren mamish, but the Tosfos points out that it wasn't actually on his grave, ela berichuk arba amos, but it was at a distance, it was 6 feet away. Why? Deleka loeg larash. Because that way they avoided the problem of ridiculing the dead. What's the issue of ridiculing the dead? Well, let's see in the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah, and then I'll explain the issue of ridiculing the dead. First of all, practical halacha in terms of what one may or may not do, say at a grave. Says the Shulchan Aruch in Archaim, chapter 71, also likros krishma toich daled amas shel mes. It is forbidden to read the Shema within 4 amas, 6 feet of a grave, or of a dead person, or in a cemetery. If you read the Shema, you have not fulfilled your obligation to read the Shema. That is considered a place of impurity. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'hu adin. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. I threw in that it's a place of impurity. That's not what the Mishnah Berurah says. The Mishnah Berurah says that the reason that you are not allowed to read the Shema then, well, let's see, he says, V'hu adin lema kaddish ushar divrei kedusha. This is interesting because, sometimes when we have things like consecrations and we do kaddish right there by the graveside, right up close, that could be problematic according to Mishnah Berurah. So he says you can't do the kaddish or other words of holiness. V'hatam, the reason is mishum loeg larash, because we are ridiculing the silent. What's ridiculing the silent? Probably many people are familiar with the minhag of, if you wear your tzitzis out, then when you go to a cemetery, the halacha is that you have to tuck your tzitzis in, right, in the cemetery. Not because it's a place of impurity. Right? If that were the case, then anytime I go into the bathroom, into the loo, I would also have to tuck my tzitzis in, or maybe even take my tzitzis off. I'm not allowed to walk into the loo with my talis on. Right? That's considered disrespectful. I have to take my talis off. But my undergarment tzitzis, not only don't I have to remove them, but I don't even have to tuck them in. Right? So it's not the issue in the case of the undergarment tzitzis of the place of impurity. They can be in certain places. The issue is loeg larash, ridiculing the silent. Meaning to say like this: it is ridiculing or mocking when somebody else, when you show off in front of someone else your blessings, that's a problem. When you have something that somebody else doesn't have and you flaunt it, that's probably the best word, flaunting what you have and they don't have, that's problematic. So here, what's the one thing that the living have that the dead don't have? The ability to perform mitzvahs. Right? Throughout our lifetime, we can perform mitzvahs. Once we pass on to the next world, static. End of story. And that whatever you performed, that's it. Reason is, well, it's kind of a given. Obvious the reason why you can't perform mitzvahs in the next world, because the only way that we are able to perform mitzvahs in this world is due to the fact that we have free choice. We could just as easily not wear the tzitzis, and because maybe I don't feel like that. If you're in the olam ha'emes, in the world of truth, where it's not a matter of not feeling like it, you want to do God's will. It goes without saying. There's no choice. You see only the truth, and only the truth says mitzvahs, mitzvahs, mitzvahs. And so it goes without saying that you're going to make the right choices, in which case it's not a choice, in which case it's not a mitzvah. Right? So mitzvahs can only happen by definition in this world, to the extent that the Gemaras that say that Meis Potem in a mitzvahs, that we have to define it to be able to say that somebody who has died is now exempt from mitzvahs, and it has ramifications when it comes to issues of paternity after death, it has issues of yibum, various issues. But it's only during one's lifetime that one can perform mitzvahs, and so the people that are there in the cemetery, right, there's some sort of connection, otherwise we wouldn't go to Kivrei Tzaddikim. We wouldn't go, obviously we believe that their main abode is in the heavens, but there's some connection to the Maris Machpelah, the cave of the patriarchs. Something is there that's connected. Now what's the connection? I should have brought this as a source, because this is really important. In contrast with almost any other religion that believes that the ultimate place, the ultimate resting place, eternal life is in heaven, that's not what we believe. We believe that the ultimate place is here. We believe in Tchias HaMesim, in the resurrection. After Mashiach comes, maybe immediately, maybe after a period of time, the next stage will be the resurrection of the dead. And so the neshamas, the souls, will come back into this world, return to the bodies, and live in this world as souls in bodies. So body is still very important. So soul still has a connection to that place where that body was buried. Why? I'm getting a little tangential, but this is always an important point to make as to why this is a fundamental tenet of Judaism, the resurrection. In the absence of resurrection, there would be an absence of divine justice. Why? Because who did a mitzvah in this world? Who's learning Torah right now? Is it our souls? Our bodies? Both, right? Your soul and you couldn't do it without the vehicle of the body. And the body couldn't do it without the soul that's generating it. And so it's a partnership between body and soul, right, that's given as an example in our sages give of if somebody was, two people were hired to look after a field. Right? You had a person who was lame and a person who was blind. And then they decided, you know what, we're going to steal some of the crops, pick some of the fruit from the orchard, and the owner comes back and he's like, you know, who took the fruit? Like, well, it wasn't me, I can't walk. And the other fellow said, well, it wasn't me, I can't see. And he says, you know, you think I'm a fool? Picks up the lame person, puts him on the back of the blind person, and he says, I know how you did it. Right? I know how you committed the crime. All you have to do now is direct him. And that's the partnership, as I just said, between body and soul. Each one on its own has a deficiency, is unable to carry out the mission. Right? But body and soul coming together is the only way to fulfill the mission. Consequently, if we were only to reward soul, as many religions suggest, how would that be fair? Right? We have to reward both soul together with body, and whatever's happening now is an in-between stage, is a transitional stage. It's actually a machlokas, it's a debate between the Rambam and Ramban. The Rambam believes that the final point happens actually after Tchias HaMesim and is back to a totally spiritual stage, whereas Ramban, Nachmanides, says that it is eternally we are back here in the state of body and soul, but without, of course, all of the afflictions of the body that we deal with right now. It would be perfection, right? No health issues. Right? We would simply be living in a state of perfect health, and everything would be fine. Okay, but in that stage, when the soul has passed on without that body, and you are wandering around the cemetery and saying the Shema, wearing your tzitzis, that is loeg l'rash. At that point, you are mocking the dead because you're flaunting something that they don't have. They're silent, they can't do mitzvahs, and so I'm not allowed to do it. But again, it's not because, but we do see that there is, so far what the Shofar has told us is that we, to a certain extent, don't daven by the grave of tzaddikim, but we do know that we're doing something. So what is it that we're doing? So I want to bring you to a couple of other sources over the page. We have the Sefer Hasidim that says that it's really powerful, the connection between soul and its place of the body's abode in this world. If the dead wanted to show themselves, they could even appear even though they were buried in shrouds, they could appear in fine clothes, whatever clothes they want. Sometimes they could appear in the clothes that they were buried in. Could be the clothes from before. This is actually a source. Some asked, when Tchias Mason happens, what clothes will everybody be wearing? So some point to the Sefer Hasidim and say, well, probably the clothes of their era, till they discover Western fashion. They once saw Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who appeared in fine clothes to high lovish b'Shabbos. He was wandering around the area. I guess those who had special insight saw him in his Shabbos clothes, and not in his shrouds. The idea to show he was showing there that he is still. We know that we have a concept, and Sefer Hasidim explains this, that tzaddikim b'misas purim chayim, that the righteous in their death are called living, and tzaddik dispater, and a righteous person that has passed on, he is found in this world in an even greater measure than during his lifetime. During his lifetime, he was constrained by the body, by the physical constraints of right here, right now. Once you pass on, you can be anywhere, anytime, like an angel. Right? So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi would appear from time to time, and in his full strength. I'm not sure how this works because his potter is exempt from mitzvahs, but he says that he would even make kiddush for people, right? Because if you're going to come back, then you want to come back to the kiddush part. It's not like all other dead people who are free of mitzvahs and don't have the ability to do mitzvahs. He would appear as living, wearing his clothes, as he wore during his lifetime. As I say, righteous people are called living even in their death, and therefore he would be able to still make kiddush for his widow and family. Alright, so the Minchas Elazar explains this a little further, and he tries to tie together our issues of, on the one hand, we said that you can't ask of the dead, and on the other hand, we said that sometimes we do go to a cemetery. So Minchas Elazar of Munkach, before the war. So he brings a Maharil that says, that which we're accustomed to go to a cemetery on a fast day, there are many reasons for it. What you're doing is very important to know, says Maharil, who's a medieval commentator. What you're doing, you're not davening to the dead people. Right? Really important to know. Rather, what you're doing is you're asking God to grant you whatever Yeshua, whatever salvation, whatever needs you have, healing, parnasa, in the merit of those who have passed on and are buried right here. Right? So it's meant to be, it's a context, but it's not a context. It's kind of how I explained it earlier, and maybe this is where my thinking was because I read the Minchas Elazar earlier. Whereas the Gemara itself seems to say that the context is meant to set the atmosphere for us. Here it's not about us. Here I'm appealing to God. Do it not for me. Do it for them. יש להם את אין הכוון בגמרא שמבקשים מהם שימליצו ויבקשו עלינו רחמים, רק שמספלם להשם יסברך בסתם או לאשר הבייס הקברס משום משכנס צדיקים וחסידים הם שמים התפילה מעלים אויזם בסקוסם. He says we're not asking that according to the Minchas Loza here, we're not asking for them to intercede on our behalf. He says we're asking that that our prayers should be answered in their merit, and that they should be the ones to take our prayers up to God. Right? They're not intermediaries per se that we're asking them be our advocate, according to this part of the Minchas Loza at least. Rather, we're just asking them to carry the message, to be the messenger. So you see the difference there, the nuanced difference between being a messenger of our prayer versus interceding on my behalf. Says the Minchas Loza in Chelik Gimel, וגם התפילת הקבוס וקריאת התורה בצבע שם הוא כדי להעלות תפילתנו לפני כיסא הכבוד, אשר צדיק הכבוד יעלה. Right, so he seems to suggest here, and I've only given a small quote of what he says, despite the halacha that we have, that you can't daven by a grave because of lo'ed l'rash, you will be ridiculing the silent, he seems to say that the minhag is the case. And we have the story of King Chizkiyahu that had a yeshiva there, right? Maybe not right next to it, but somewhere in the vicinity. So it's kind of, we're hedging our bets almost, it feels like to me. Because on the one hand, we've said you can't daven there. On the other hand, we're saying, or learn there. On the other hand, we're saying that you can. Right? So I'm not sure that he brings it here, and he doesn't bring it. I should have brought one of the sources that distinguishes between maybe the difference is, I think maybe the Sefer Chassidim, this is why I brought the Sefer Chassidim. Sefer Chassidim really distinguish between very righteous people and everybody. So everybody, that might be a case of lo'ed l'rash, right? We don't want to daven at regular people's graves because it might be putting them on the spiritual spot, so to speak. But the likes of a King Chizkiyahu, who was a once-in-a-lifetime kind of person, or Rabbeinu HaKadosh, or others, kirei tzaddikim, so maybe they would be permissible because they have enough schus, enough merit from what they accumulate during their lifetime that we're never going to put them to shame without mumbling through our tehillim. Right? So he says what we're doing there, davening and even kriyas Torah, making a minyan by the graveside, is where we want that that the tzaddik that is buried there should take up our prayers. Again, we're not saying that they should intercede, rather that they should take our prayers up. Okay, and then he brings the Maharil, who says that there is a minhag l'ishtatech be'erev Rosh Hashanah al kivrei tzaddikim, that we go to daven at the graves of the righteous, beginning of the third line, on erev Rosh Hashanah. The Beis HaKfaros mokem menuchas hatzaddikim hu mokem kodesh v'toher. The place where the righteous are buried is a place that is holy and pure, but Philin is Kabbalah Yosef. As the Maharil says, it's a more fitting place for prayers to be accepted, which is kind of what we said in the, I guess it's the explanation of the second half, of the second opinion in the Gemara and Tainus. According to the first opinion, we were going to the cemetery in order to arouse within us a feeling of extra teshuvah. According to the second opinion, it was that they will request mercy on our behalf, and I think he's reinterpreting it here to be able to say it's not so much they're requesting mercy, but that they at least according to the first way he's read it, is that they will carry out our prayers, and maybe it's the other way around. Maybe those two things that he just said correspond to the two ideas in the Gemara, just the other way around. The first one, where he says that the point is for the tzaddik to take my prayers in, that would correspond to interceding on my behalf, and that's an explanation of that, so that it doesn't sound like we have an intermediary. The second one, it says that Minchas Loza says where it's a holy and pure place, that would correspond, and our prayers are more acceptable there, that would correspond to the first opinion in the Gemara and Tainus of the page, that says that we are coming to a cemetery in order to arouse within us a certain feeling. So it's kind of different because is it the place, is it us? But there's something happening that's at least parallel. And how much more so he says our forebears. Right? So I'm not sure here that he is only talking about tzaddikim. I think he's even talking about our own personal forebears, because that would fit the explanation of this is a place of, these are holy grounds. Therefore, he says, his conclusion is that it's for the honor of the day. So it's on account of their holiness that our prayers, will be brought up. And what we're aiming to do is to break the iron curtain that separates between us and God due to our great sins. We want to be able to have greater impact with our tefillos. So two aspects. Number one, that we should daven better because of the environment and because it's a holier place. And number two, that they should carry our prayers as well. But it seems certainly, according to the Minchas Elazar, that it's not an issue of interceding. I didn't bring sources. I should have brought sources that talk about interceding. Certainly, it seems that that's the case when the Gemara in Timus is read it literally, and the Gemara Sota as we read it literally as well with the story of Kalev. But I think the question does remain open as to really the purpose. Are we asking them to carry our prayers? Are we asking them to intercede on our behalf? Are we just simply davening in a holy place? But that's really the basic framework for the notion of davening at Kivrei Tzaddikim. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch off the stream, because if you guys have any questions, they won't hear it. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and please do stay tuned for further Torah and Hot Issues classes, and please do consider joining us live in person.